need to ask her for that. You had told me you guys make some cauliflower crusted pizza or something. I need to come up with find that recipe from her. Oh my gosh.
It's labor intensive. So she doesn't do it very often.
Yeah.
But it's it looks like mashed potatoes.
So do you like have to steam it first and then put it in like a little blender food processor?
She processes it, so I'm sure she cooks it.
Right, so it's like mush.
Right.
And then you would just add some flour or something to get it some thickness.
Flour.
Oh, cornstarch. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, flour just adds carbs.
And it's just all that process. I mean, I love it. I love baked steak.
Yeah, I love it. So my favorite meal is breakfast, so I can make baked stuff. Love it.
I love breakfast. I like breakfast for dinner. It is my favorite. But it's not good.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of like that, what Europeans imagine of American breakfast.
Yes,
Breakfast
yes.
table, and it's got like a pound of bacon, and the Bible, one egg, and like, you don't have enough eggs.
Like the mom in the 50s that has the short stack super high, the butter all over the place.
Well, when I was little, we ate breakfast. Yeah. That's what we grew up on. So I
Yeah.
ate that lunch.
We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We do our marching to one beat, rushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We do our marching to one beat, rushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. In our hearts we have a vision. We have made our decision to show the Father's love with great power from above. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We do our marching to one beat, rushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. Let us reach this generation, every tribe and every nation, for we've overcome the world by the blood of Christ the Lamb. We are united in Jesus Christ. We are the soldiers of the light. We don't wrestle flesh and blood, but principalities of the dark. We do our marching to one beat, rushing the enemy under our feet. We are mighty in our stand, with God's word in our hand. Lord our God is a sword and shield. 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 Lord our God is a sword and shield.
just by the fact that you said good morning back, I know my microphone's on. So thanks for that mic check. But hey, thanks for everyone who has made it out here. Extremely cold weather, so glad you're able to make it here. Thanks for everybody who's listening online, and I look forward to sharing with you. So today is part one of the two-part session where I'm doing the first piece in terms of approaches towards witnessing. And the second part will be done by Laura Gilliland, I think in the next couple of weeks. I'm not exactly sure the timing, but so it's a two-part series in terms of that. So just to sort of give a little bit of recap in terms of what I'm going to be talking about and sharing with you guys today, is that over these 8 weeks, time, there's the sermon series that Pastor Tieman's doing. There's small group Bible studies, and then there's obviously this Mid-Pointe series that we're talking about witnessing and whatnot. So as I started to think about really sort of the whole notion of witnessing and the significance of witnessing, is that when you sort of stop and think about it, a lot of the talks that are being done and a lot of the teaching that's going to be done is pretty much around the how to witness. And when you think about it, also the necessity towards witnessing is pretty obvious. God calls all Christians to witness. So as I stopped and I thought about it, I'm like, well, the approaches towards witnessing, when you really stop and think about it, aren't really overly complicated. I mean, in some respects, it's just rather simple. We've got to get out and we have to have conversations, and we've got to develop relationships, with people, and that's sort of the essence of the approaches. But it sort of begs the question of then, why are there so many challenges, or what are the challenges that are getting in the way in terms of doing these simple approaches and meeting the necessity, that God has for us to go out and witness? And the reason, so I wanted to build a talk around that because the reality is, if that we don't address the inhibitors or the barriers towards witnessing, it's going to be very difficult for us to ever implement any approaches or for us to execute against any approaches to witnessing. So what's also really great about teaching and whatnot, at least from my perspective, and I've been doing this for 18, 19 years, is that you learn from preparing for all of these talks. And as I thought about it, I had never done in my time, or not any time that I can remember, a talk on witnessing. So this is the first time in the 18 years, for all the different talks and the variety of topics that I've taught, this is the first time I've done it. And what's been great about this over the last 5-6 weeks is I prepared for this talk. It was a nice self-teaching, so I learned a lot. I learned more than what I thought I actually really knew about witnessing. And really, when I started to do the study, the first thing that I did was look at the definition of witnessing. I mean, it seems sort of simple, because certainly going into witnessing and how I've always thought of witnessing, I had a certain perception of what witnessing was. And then just right out of the gate and just reading the definition of witnessing, I clearly didn't have it exactly right. In fact, my perception of witnessing was slightly off. So what I want to do is I want to first share what the definition of witnessing is. But before I do that, I kind of want you to just take just a brief moment and think for yourself, what is the definition of what witnessing, and beyond just the definition of witnessing, what do you perceive witnessing to be? So just take just a quick moment, give you a chance to think about it. No right or wrong answers, but just set a perception in your mind. Okay, so turning to the definition of witnessing is that to share your personal thoughts and beliefs about the truth of Christ, right? To share your personal thoughts and beliefs about the truth of Christ. The objective of witnessing is to enable non-believers the opportunity to see the truth of Christ through your eyes as Messiah and God, right? To enable, right? That's an important piece to that. So relative to the definition, first of all, I mean, just, answer the question in your own minds, does this align with, what you thought the definition to be or how you perceive witnessing to be? For me, the part that that was sort of additive, that was a little bit of an aha moment that I want to bring out here right from the beginning, is that the definition is to share your personal thoughts and beliefs about the truth of Christ. What the definition is not, which again was more interesting to me, what the definition is not, it's not saying that to go out and convert people to Christianity, right? That's not what the definition, and that's not what the purpose of witnessing is. So why do I bring that out? Well, to me, you know, if you're talking about, so again, I mean, what this talk is about is trying to get at what the inhibitors and the barriers are to witnessing, what's standing in our way of witnessing, and how can we overcome those barriers. Well, right out of the gate, if your definition of witnessing is to convert versus to share, those are two very different things. And quite frankly, the pressure to have to convert is much greater than the pressure to have to share. And as a result, that's, to me, like right out of the gate, you know, like I want to hit a punchline. And the first punchline for me is that if your expectation is set that conversion is the goal here, that's probably a key inhibitor as to why people are more apprehensive towards witnessing. And certainly from my perspective, I mean, it does sort of take quite a bit of pressure off in how I've always perceived witnessing to be going out and converting people. The converting people is not your job. The converting people is God's job, and it's God's job through the Holy Spirit. Your job is just simply to share the truth. And to take that like one step further, when you look at the term witness, I mean, sort of the first thing that comes to your mind when you say, you know, beyond just like from a Christian perspective, like in terms of witnessing, but just witnessing in general, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of witnessing is someone who is a witness in a court of law in a trial, right? And the purpose of a witness is simply to get on the stand, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help them God, right? As far as like their purpose isn't to go and sit on the stand and to try and influence or be the one that's responsible for reaching a verdict that's in line with the objective of the trial. The responsibility of that is in the attorney's hands, right? The responsibility of the attorney is to align a set of witnesses such that they can achieve their purpose and objective, which is trying to influence an outcome from the jury. So in effect, God calling us to witness, we are in fact God's witnesses to just tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and it's up to God to do the converting. So I want to just be really clear, I'm not comparing God to lawyers, right? Or I'm not suggesting that lawyers are God, because that's not the case. No offense against any lawyers. But I think you get sort of the message. I mean, the burden or the responsibility of witnessing is just simply to share the truth of your personal belief of Christ, period. So that leads to, now that was just all the introduction, right? So just to get you sort of set up. But the agenda in terms of what we're going to be talking about the rest of the way is that I started out by suggesting that, or making sort of a point or a suggestion that, that there's a growing reluctance towards witnessing. So the first thing that we're going to go through is I'm going to take you through a survey. An objective point of view is to the fact that there is a growing reluctance towards witnessing, some in apprehension towards witnessing. And then we're going to take that a step further, and we're going to say, okay, well, what's the cause of those barriers? What's the cause of that apprehension? And until we're able to sort of get a handle on that, you know, we can't begin to sort of address approaches. And then sort of buried in there, too, or sort of an extension of the self-assessment, you know, I'm going to give a little bit of background about history around Old Testament versus New Testament thoughts and requirements towards witnessing that I think you might find interesting. And then we'll get to some of the common barriers of witnessing and actions that we could ultimately take to address those barriers towards witnessing. So first off, so again, I mean, like, I'm going to start out with the survey that was done, and it was conducted by the Lutheran Hour of Ministries and the Barron Group, right? So they actually went out and did a study, like 25 years ago, 1993. they did a study in terms of the effectiveness of witnessing, or what the state of witnessing was in the Christian community. And then 25 years later, they then did a follow-up to that same study to see what was happening. And much of like what this is coming from, is, as far as the source, is that this is a book that I read. It was The Reluctant Witness, and written by Don Everts. And much of the study that I'm referencing here comes from this book. It was a really good book if you're interested. In what was interesting about this study is that, and there's many questions that kind of poured through there, and I tried to sort of boil it down to 3 questions that sort of bring out the point that there is definitely a growing reluctance to witnessing. In I think what 700 Christians were surveyed on this. And first question being, do you believe that every Christian has an obligation to share their faith? And in 1993, 89% of the Christians who answered this question said yes, whereas 25 years later, only 64% of Christians believed that it was their obligation to share their faith. Then the second question that they were asked, or second question that at least I'm sharing that they were asked, is that, how many of you speak about the benefits of accepting and following Christ? It was 78% in 1993. 25 years later, it was 50%. And then the last piece that I'm bringing out is that, how many Christians have told their story of how they first came to believe in Jesus. And that was 50% in 1993, which wasn't a big number back then, and it's even lower right now, 45%. So the purpose of this slide is just, not giving you my opinion that there's a growing reluctance and a belief that there's a growing reluctance towards witnessing, but this is a very objective study that was done that shows that there is definitely a growing reluctance towards witnessing. So then, what we want to do is, like, why, right? I mean, it's the next obvious question is, why is there a reluctance or a growing reluctance towards witnessing? And to first answer that question, that the answer is it depends, right? It depends on who you are, right? I don't necessarily know specifically what everyone's reason for not wanting to witness or what's standing in the way of witnessing. That's something only that you can answer, right? So there's, what I'm going to say is that there's the way to sort of get at this is that, in essence, you got to do a self-assessment, which sounds, sort of a fancy or very structured way of kind of going about this. But like anything in life, right? Anything that that we want to do better, that we're doing, that we don't want to do, right? I mean, if we want to lose weight, if we want to stop smoking, or if you're drinking too much alcohol, or drug addiction, or whatever it might be, right? The solutions are actually pretty simple, right? Just stop smoking, stop drinking, stop doing drugs, exercise more if you're overweight, and eat less, right? I mean, those are simple solutions. I mean, no different than some of the simple solutions about witnessing. However, the real questions is that what's causing you, or what's keeping you from doing what you ultimately want to do, or ultimately where you want to be. And again, the only way that you could figure that out, and particularly in the subject of witnessing, is self-assess. I mean, being honest with yourself. What is it that's keeping me? And then once you sort of understand what is keeping you, then and only then can you start to address those inhibitors to be able to get you to where you want to get to. Right, so I will be the guinea pig here because I'm the teacher, right? So I get to be the guinea pig. And I'm going to do like what I did for myself. Again, I mean, this was a great learning experience. It's sort of a self-assessment in terms of my ability to witness, my strengths, but not only my strengths, but my weaknesses. What are my barriers and inhibitors towards witnessing? Because I've got it way less than perfect. And then what are the causes and reasons, for those barriers? Right, and then, it's just not enough to kind of go through this, and then you got to, address it because we all want to get better at whatever it is that we're weak at. So to start out with, sort of from my perspective in terms of what I view my strengths of witnessing is teaching, right? I mean, doing what I'm doing right now, right? At any time that I'm teaching, in a public setting, whether it's here in Mid-Pointe, whether it's back in the music room, whether it's like when we do a Passover Seder meal or whatever, I'm like 100% comfortable in witnessing. And quite frankly, every time I teach, it's an element of witnessing because I'm in essence teaching the truth of what I believe the truth to be about Jesus Christ, and have no problem whatsoever witnessing in that fashion. However, like when I get to really my weaknesses or what I'm not good at or what I'm not comfortable with is witnessing one-on-one. Like, I mean, developing relationships and witnessing one-on-one to family, primarily extended family, friends, good acquaintances, and whatnot. I actually, as comfortable as I am in this setting, is as uncomfortable as I am in that setting. So why is that, right? So I mean, if you think about it, like sort of like public speaking, right? I mean, you could have well over 100 people that are going to be watching like every word that I'm saying for 40 minutes. I mean, it couldn't be more of an uncomfortable setting to public speaking. It's never easy. But yet I'm super comfortable witnessing and sharing what my personal beliefs are. But yet the opposite, where I'm with people that I know and I trust, and not that I don't trust you guys, that isn't the case. I don't know everybody here, but why is it that in a situation that I would expect to be super comfortable with, people that I'm super uncomfortable? Well, for me, as I thought about it, the answer is pretty simple, right? Because in this setting, right, I haven't really asked, maybe outside of my immediate family, I haven't asked anybody to come here today or to watch, on the screen or anytime, right? So as a result, when you come here, you're coming here, you're soliciting my point of view on what I believe the truth about Christ is, right? That's, you're soliciting. However, in personal settings, in most times or most situations, I mean, I can't remember or recall someone saying, hey, Dave, why do you believe what you believe about Jesus Christ? I mean, it just doesn't really come up that way, right? So the only way that I can ultimately deliver what I believe, not only what I believe, but why I believe it, is that it would have to be unsolicited, right? And as we know, or at least I know, like anybody that's given me unsolicited advice or unsolicited points of view, I tend to feel uncomfortable with, or sometimes I feel somewhat resentful of that. And as a result, I'm real hypersensitive to that. And as a result, I'm less good, or less than good. I mean, I know it's probably not grammatically correct, but less than good in terms of witnessing in that setting. So that's not enough, right? So I wanted to keep going. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper. So I stopped, someone would say, well, is it just that, right? I mean, what is it that causes me to have sort of that sensitivity, or in some cases, that hypersensitivity towards witnessing in a personal situation, right? I mean, the interesting thing is that we're going to be talking about, like, one of the how-tos is developing relationships, and that's the best course towards ultimately witnessing, and that's a tripping point for me. But I wanted to understand, like, why is, where does that hypersensitivity come from? And so I started to reflect a bit, and I'm like, well, it probably has something to do with my upbringing. Not blaming it on my upbringing, but just the practicality or mere reality of the fact that my upbringing, as most people know by now, that, I was raised in a Jewish family. So being raised in a Jewish family, being taught, going to Hebrew school and being taught by Jewish teachers, going to the synagogue, being taught by rabbis, in the Jewish community, I mean, flat out in the Jewish community, they don't witness. The Jewish people in their community do not witness, they do not evangelize. And in fact, not only do they not witness or they don't evangelize, they've got a huge defense mechanism towards being witnessed to or evangelized to. I mean, they're on guard, right? I mean, they don't want that whatsoever, and nor do they do that, meaning they don't go out and try and convince other people to come to the Jewish religion. So, sure that the next question is pretty obvious. Why not, right? Why is it, as important as it is for Christians to witness, why is it, just the opposite? Why is it the antithesis for Jewish people to witness? Well, take a look at the Old Testament, right? If you take the Old Testament, right, which is the foundation of our religion, right? I mean, it's the prequel to the New Testament, and it's the story about God's relationship with the Jewish people, right? And in that story, like if you go in the Old Testament, nowhere will you be able to find in the Old Testament God calling the Jewish people to go out and witness. No place. No place in the Old Testament. And it's like, okay, well, why not? Right? Why hasn't God called the Jewish people, or why didn't he call the Jewish people to go and witness and try and bring the Gentiles into the Jewish religion? Well, the truth of that is that the reason being is that God had a specific purpose for the Jewish people, a very specific purpose. And that purpose for the Jewish people was to be the deliverer of the Messiah, right? So through the Jewish people, through the chosen people, God's purpose for them was to be the deliverer, the Jewish people to be the deliverer of the Messiah. That was the purpose. So as a result, in order to fulfill that purpose through the Jewish people and only the Jewish people, the bloodline had to be maintained. Right? So God protected the bloodline from being contaminated whatsoever. Right? So if God had called the Jewish people to go out and witness, and they started to witness, and then there's intermarriages, what ultimately would start to happen and eventually happen is that it would water down the bloodline and potentially cause that bloodline to be extinct. Well, if that bloodline became extinct, the Messiah would never have made it through the bloodline. A real important point. But then, as far as like one of the things I kind of, want to bring out too on this is that, why is it, still why couldn't the Messiah come, period, without it having to go through the Jewish people? Well, I don't know how many people came and listened to my last talk in November, which was on Old Testament prophecy. And if you didn't, I think it's still out there on the site. I highly recommend that you do take the time to do that. And as we start sort of intersecting like these talks, because none of these talks are mutually exclusive, I'm trying to, we want to try and create connectivity to each of these topics. But the whole purpose of that talk in terms of Old Testament prophecy was the fact that God had put together a set of prophecies in the Old Testament. What a prophecy is, it's just simply a prediction. It's a prediction of an outcome. And all throughout the Old Testament, there was these predictions of an outcome of like when the Messiah would come, who would the Messiah be? And God's purpose for Old Testament prophecy was that when the Messiah would come, that there would be no question, no doubt as to who the Messiah is, right? Absolutely no doubt. So that when he came, it's like nobody can deny it because the Messiah would have fulfilled all Old Testament prophecies. So the very first prophecy, like when you go to the end of the book of Matthew, very first book of the New Testament, the sequel to the prequel of the Old Testament is the book of Matthew. In the book of Matthew, Matthew taught, his whole premise about the truth about Jesus Christ being the Messiah was the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. And lo and behold, what was the very first chapter when you open up the book of Matthew is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Jesus having flown through the bloodline of the Jewish people. You go through it, it's there, right? So as a result, right, again, had God called the Jewish people to go out and witness in the Old Testament in intermarriage and watering down the bloodline, it would have created some level of uncertainty as to whether the Messiah truly was the Messiah. Now, the fulfillment of the Messiah coming through the chosen people, the bloodline of the Jews, is one of 350 prophecies, but all 350 prophecies had to be fulfilled in order for it to be real. So, i.e., thus the importance of God protecting the bloodline of the Jewish people throughout the Old Testament. And in fact, you can almost think about it as an incubation of the Jewish people and keeping them from witnessing. So let's take that, then another step further. Then suddenly, why then is it okay? Then now we're going to talk about, like now we're in the New Testament, the Messiah has come through Jesus, and now God says, go out and witness. And who does he say go out and witness to? Initially, it's the disciples of Jesus to the Jews, right? To go and disciple to the ends of the earth, right? Go out and do this. Why suddenly was this okay to do? Why, it was not okay all the way up until the time that Jesus came and proved that he was the Messiah. All throughout the Old Testament, witnessing was like banned, do not witness. Well, the reason being is let's go back to the Old Testament and go back to the time of Abraham, right? So through Abraham, we know is the father of faith, right? God had called Abraham to go and sacrifice his one and only son, right? Abraham did that, right? I mean, he was on the verge of sacrificing Isaac. And then God stopped him, and then God's sort of admiration for the extreme faith that Abraham had placed blessings, through Abraham. He said, Abraham, you will be blessed, that all nations and all people on earth will be blessed through you, Abraham. And what does it actually mean in terms of how all nations and all people on earth will be blessed through Abraham? Well, it's through Abraham and the Jewish people, right? I mean, he's the father of the Jews, that the Messiah would be delivered, right? And that's how all people and all nations on earth would be blessed, was through the deliverance of the Messiah and through the deliverance of Abraham and the chosen people. As such, once the Messiah came, the fulfillment or the necessity for the chosen people, God's objective for the chosen people was 100% fulfilled. It was accomplished. And given the fact that the Messiah, the benefit of the Messiah, wasn't just for the Jews, it was supposed to be for all people, Jew and Gentile, all nations, all people on earth. So as a result, once the Messiah came through the chosen people, there was no longer a necessity to maintain that incubation or that bloodline with the Jewish people. And as such, it was like a green light to go out and witness, because now Jew and Gentile could come together, because all nations, all people on earth would be blessed, right? And the only way they could be blessed is if the story is told, outwardly. So, the last thing too, like when I started out, like, hey, the Jewish people, they do not witness, right? I'm sure that no one has ever been approached by a Jewish person to say, hey, come to the Jewish religion. And that still holds to this day, and that holds to this day naturally because, the leaders, the structure of the Jewish people, they're still waiting they still don't believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, and they're still waiting for the coming of the Messiah. As a result, they're still on guard to witnessing. As a result, that's, in essence, how I was raised to sort of think, right? Be on guard to witnessing, and we are not witnesses. But the one last thing that I kind of want to leave you with this on this point is this, right? Which is thinking about like difference between Jew and Christians, and Jew and Christians relative to witnessing, right? Just don't ever forget, a person is Jewish based on who they're born to, right? You can only be Jewish if you're born with, from a father and a mother who are both Jewish with pure Jewish bloodline, right? So, and when you come out of the womb, from the moment you come out of the womb to the day you go into the grave, you're Jewish, right? To the moment I came out of the womb to the day that I go to the grave, I'm Jewish, and extremely proud of my Jewish bloodline. And in fact, it's my Jewish bloodline and my Jewish upbringing and all that I've learned, when I came to know Christ, is enhanced by my Jewish upbringing and understanding. But on the Christian side, you're not Christian because you're born into a Christian family, which is different than Jews. You're Christian based on your free belief, in terms of the understanding and truth of Jesus Christ. And I bring that up, that again, that's a necessity for witnessing, and not to ever take for granted in your witness that just because someone happens to associate themselves with Christianity because that's the family that they're born into, that's not how you become Christian. But having said that, Christianity is open to the public, 100% of the universe. Okay, so now, where do we go from here? So coming out of this then, again, the only way that you really kind of get to, I can't tell you like what your inhibitors or barriers are. Having said that, I think that these are probably some common barriers to witnessing. Certainly from my perspective, these are some of the common barriers to witnessing that I struggled with more on a one-on-one basis. One is really just concerned about or the fear of offending others, right? If someone is tied to a religious perspective and you're witnessing and you're, about Christianity and the person that you're witnessing to has a religious affiliation that's outside of Christianity, you're going to implicitly be telling them that they're wrong about their beliefs. And if there's some sensitivity that exists, there's a risk that you're going to offend the person that you're witnessing to. But I also go back to the definition of witnessing, what it is and what it is not, is that we're not to play God, and as a result, we got to be sensitive to that. But the second common barrier is the fear of rejection, in that also that religion can be thought of sometimes as a team sport, right? And I don't mean to take away from religion at all, but like people have sort of this team sport mentality. You're on the team or you're not on the team, right? I mean, you're a Cubs fan or you're a Sox fan, you're a Bears fan or you're a Packers fan, or you're a Michigan fan or an Ohio State fan or whatever it is. People get, you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, people get sort of this team sport mentality that as a result, like there's a general fear of like, wow, if I say something that's opposite of what the person on the other side is, I might get, there's an element of rejection that could come from that. Not necessarily where you want to have your mindset to, but it's real. I mean, that's what we're just talking about, is practically what's real. And then the last point here is about lacking biblical depth to address questions. So when you witness, you're likely going to be hit with questions that are coming to you, and there's always a fear of like, wow, could I answer every question that's asked of me? And anybody that says that they can answer every question that's asked of them, I would say that they're probably a liar, because I mean nobody has all the answers to all the questions. So it's a fear that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit as we come to a close. So now to the point of addressing barriers to witnessing. So no matter what, right? So I just talked about the risk of the risk or the things that sort of potentially get in our way in terms of witnessing. I mean, I started out the talk with bringing up the point that if your definition is off, if you believe that you've got the obligation to convert people versus just simply share your faith, I mean, that certainly is something that could get away. And if you're afraid of offending or rejecting or being rejected, that's certainly an issue. But you're never going to be able to escape these risks. I mean, there's any good thing in life, there's risk reward. Anything that's not worth having doesn't come, generally comes with zero risk. However, there's a way to mitigate those risks, that we're all worried about, that is potentially the things that are standing in our way for feeling comfortable to witness. And that's, again, I mean, the whole notion of relationship building and knowing your audience. If we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 through 23, I'll just jump to that right here. Paul wrote a letter to Corinth, and it reads as, in this period, it reads as, though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became one under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became one as one outside the law, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. So what is really Paul getting at is that, again, it's a know your audience, right? I mean, you have your story is your story in terms of your witness, but you've got to know the players on the other side, right? And the better that you know the players, and the better you could adjust your game in order to effectively witness. And that's what Paul did. I mean, Paul recognized that not necessarily one story or one approach fits all. You've got to adjust and maneuver such that you could comfortably fit within the person who you're witnessing to, so that they're receptive listeners, right? And that's what we're trying to get from witnessing, are receptive listeners. The one thing that I think about is like, a piece of work that I do is in product development, and one of my roles in product development is really the commercialization of products, which is just simply a fancy term of saying for the product that you're going to sell to customers, that those customers are willing to pay the price for that in a way that you can make a profit. But the first thing in product development that you do is you define who the market is, who the potential customers are. And in no case, like, is any product, fit all, one product doesn't fit all. So you got to know your customers, and you got to gear your product offering and your messaging and your marketing towards those customers, right? If you think about it, like when you're like in a room watching a commercial on TV, sometimes like half the people that you're with are looking at the commercial and laughing and saying, wow, that's a great commercial, and the other half are saying, that's the dumbest commercial I've ever seen, right? Well, the chances are that the people that think that it's the dumbest commercial that they've ever seen, that message wasn't geared towards them, and vice versa. So again, sort of leave you on this is that just know your audience and adjust it and maneuver accordingly. The second point here is your attention or your intentions for witnessing need to be pure and sincere. See, it sounds really obvious, but it's very, very necessary. So in Colossians chapter 4, verse 5 through 6, it reads, walk in wisdom towards outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So the first thing that I want to address on that verse is this. It talks about the best use of your time, right? And what I think about in terms of the best use of your time is just knowing that although we're supposed to be sharing, which we should be sharing to the ends of the earth, to all people, to the ends of the earth, the truth about Jesus Christ, there's going to be people that are just flat out from the get-go not going to accept your message, right? I mean, there's the extremists, right? I mean, if someone has extreme points of view in religion or extreme points of view in sort of atheistic points of view, your chances or probability of reaching them is probably slim and none. And your time is, there's opportunity cost with your time, right? If you're spending time with someone who's probably got zero chance or zero probability of hearing the message, there's better use of time, right? So, I mean, just to sort of like equate that message to, if you think about like in the presidential campaigns, they, right off the bat, right, 40 out of 50 states are going to go Democrat or Republican, right out of the gate. In most presidential races, come down to 10 states. Well, the presidential candidates aren't spending their time in those 40 states. They're spending their time in those 10 states because they're making the best use of their time because the chances of moving the needle on those two groups of people is very, very slim. Now, having said that, I just made the point that the extremes are likely, probably not the best use of your time, but that's just the fact. They're extremes. They're not the norm. There's a ton of meat on the bone right in the middle, right? There's a lot of people who are, maybe associate themselves with some sort of religious beliefs, but are somewhat indifferent towards that, but are searching. They want something more. They want some more meaning in their life. So there's lots of people to go after. Make the best use of your time relative to that. And quite frankly, sort of the risk of offending or the risk of rejection actually goes way down when you're dealing with the meat on the bone there. And then sort of the last point is that always be ready for a national unforced opportunity to witness, right? I mean, and that's just, this verse that I think most of us are familiar with by now is 1 Peter verse 3:15. Always be prepared to make defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that you have. Right, and I'm going the wrong direction. And as a result, like, so again, my thought, I mean, like, we're teaching here in this 8 weeks some very structured approaches towards witnessing, right? But the fact of the matter is that, it's probably some of the most unstructured and unforced situations that come up that there's great opportunity there and potentially even better opportunity when it sort of just comes in more of a natural fashion and not sort of taking away any of the structured approaches. Those are fine too. But point being is just always be ready. I mean, you never know when the opportunity might hit to be able to share your story about the truth of Christ. And then lastly, and we're just about towards the end in terms of what I wanted to share, is that I want to go back to sort of summing some of the stuff up, is that at the beginning I shared, as part of the survey, that people telling their story of how they first came to believe in Jesus was 57% in 1993 and down to 45% to the present. So my message is that, sort of one of my closing messages here is that when the opportunity is right, minimally tell your story, right? And not only tell your story, but not about what you believe, right? Because anybody could go to books and read about what Christianity means, but what people are most interested in is why you believe it, right? That's what's interesting to them. That's what's most interesting and powerful. And as a result, don't shy away. I mean, tell your story, and if your story is convincing as a witness, the more convincing your story is, the more intriguing your story is, the more likely people are to listen and want to take some of those next steps. And then there was one last point, but it's starting to escape my mind here. Yes, this way. I don't want to lose this. I've gone this far, right? I don't want to lose this very last point. The very last point, too, is like, this whole fear of, having to know all the answers in the Bible and having to know the Bible perfectly and having all the answers. That's nonsense, right? Again, there's nobody that has all the answers. But and if someone starts asking questions or peppering you with questions, right, here's an opportunity to sit down and say, hey, I don't know exactly the answer to that question, but let's sit down and talk about that. But what's important about telling your story is that nobody can deny your story. They might not find it plausible, they might not find it believable, but your story is your story. So that's what you have, and that's what we're called to do, is to witness and tell our story of the truth of Christ. So that's it. 10:01. So we actually do have a few minutes for questions, if in fact you have any questions. If not, we might listen to some more music.
Any questions? Got the microphone? I've got two, but open it up to the floor first. Okay. So Dave, one thing you and I talked about years ago is having a context for the conversation. There's got to be an entry point into the conversation, and one of the big takeaways for the entire series is the fact that mass evangelism is changing. It was what I started off with in week one and where we're at now. So if we're serious about sharing our faith, how do we do that? And mass evangelism really is not where it's at because of change in society and culture. And so it's interpersonal relationships, it's knowing people and that. But the question is how do you determine the context or the entry point to the conversation with people? Do you force it? Do you try to, lead people in a certain direction? How do you open those doors of conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, I could just only give you really my personal point of view, and that's what was sort of interesting about this topic too. It was obviously a little less theological, although we talked a little bit about the Old Testament and whatnot, and it's a little bit more about, it's more behavioral, right? It's more of a behavioral study to really Don's question. And I did, relationship building is the way to go, right? I mean, there's no doubt it's the way to go. But one of the things, and actually one of the points that I did want to try and make, and I'll get to make it right now, is that you've got to be really sensitive to the other person. Like your motives for witnessing can't be what's in it for you, right? I mean, if you start sort of saying, well, my job, and I'm going to feel good if in fact I could get X number of people to convert to Christianity. Again, it's not your job to convert people to Christianity, it's God's job to convert people to Christianity. So it's what's in it for the person that you're witnessing to. And if you stop and think about it, it's like there's a lot of good that comes from the belief in being in Jesus Christ. And you should make no apologies for that. But your motives for sharing that has to be what's in it for them. I mean, no different than like if you read a good book or saw a good movie or went to a good restaurant, you want to share that with others. You don't get any benefit out of that because you want other people to feel that same happiness. So I just think that you've got to let the game come to you, so to speak. And forcing it, I just think people are going to be suspect and people are going to feel that it's more self-serving. Just my point of view on that.
Okay, and the other question is, we talked about people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This is about loving people and caring for people. And you talked about the approach inviting rather than, so I guess expand upon the difficulty of trying to share your faith with someone, and in the midst of that, not getting into the mode of proving they're wrong, because then you end up losing them in the midst of the conversation. So if you could expand on that.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of like really one of the points that I was trying to get across, even when I starting out with the definition, what witnessing is and what witnessing is not, right? I mean, witnessing isn't you don't have the responsibility of converting the person, but if you've developed a really good, strong relationship, a substantive good relationship, people want to know about each other, right? People want to learn about each other, right? So you have if the relationship is strong enough, someone's going to want to know about what it is that you believe and why you believe it in any topic, relative to that. And if you share it with sort of the notion of, this is what I believe, this is why I believe it, without sort of the expectation of, I expect you to believe this in order for this relationship to continue, I think is really super important, right? I mean, in terms of that. So, again, I mean, I can't. I mean, what was really sort of so interesting to me, like when I started studying this and really looked at the definition, which actually that slide was going to be sort of a throwaway slide. I was going to spend 2 minutes on the slide and saying, here's the definition. And as I looked at the definition and just kept sort of reflecting on the definition, it's like, wow, that's our responsibility is just to find the opportunity to share why we believe what we believe. That's it, right? And if people sort of sense that there's a motive that goes beyond that, which quite frankly isn't your responsibility, i.e. to convert, you're going to turn off even the best relationships.
Okay, any questions? Anything else? Any comments?
There's a question over here.
Here you go. I'll bring you the mic. So it's online as well.
So would you attribute, because looking at the numbers on that graph, it's quite the decline in almost 30 years. Would you attribute that decline in belief and desire to witness to the decline of truth kind of being taught in many churches and difficult topics kind of being pushed under the rug rather than talked about? And if you do, then how would you suggest that churches adjust to better arm themselves and their members to be prepared to answer the difficult questions when they will inevitably arise when witnessing?
Yeah. Again, I mean, like all of these are subject to interpretation, like in terms of why. And again, which is why I sort of built down to the individual, like only the individual can understand like what's keeping them from doing this. The book does go into a lot of like the church's responsibility in this, and there's questions asked about that and speculation on that. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a bit of capitulation at times, in the church, and I'm saying the broader church, in that there's so much pressure in terms of, conforming to the masses that I think, again, there's some capitulation in terms of not wanting to hold ground in terms of the belief of what we believe in, right? For fear of rejection, right? For fear of, rejection, in church numbers, declining and declining. So I think there could be an element, I don't have the answer per se, but that's just sort of a little bit of my speculation to that question. It's a good question, I think.
Okay, anybody else? Very good. Praise team, you guys can start going on up to the stage. And Dave, would you close us in prayer and then praise team can take over?
Sure. Let's bow our heads. Dear God, thank you for being here today to help us through this, very important but challenging topic. Thanks for, all that you do in terms of really helping to guide us and be there behind us, 100% of the way when we're going out to witness. And sort of the understanding that we have roles for ourselves and whatnot, and just really doing the job of sharing why we believe, the truth of you and Jesus. And thanks for sort of carrying the weight in terms of, helping to really get at what's most important and changing people's hearts to bring them all towards Christ. So thank you. Please hope and pray that everybody has a good safe, and productive week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Can I invite you to please rise? This song we're going to sing is called Greater, and it ties in with our witnessing because it focuses on the fact that it's not just us going out into the world. It's the Holy Spirit inside of us that is so much greater and actually doing all the work. We're just the vessel. Let's sing it together. 1, 2, 3, 4.
That's all right, 'cause I hear a voice and he's calling me, and everything I'll never need now. Greater is someone living inside of me, and he is living in the bring your doubts, bring your fears, bring your hurt, bring your tears. There'll be no wrong, your face to me. You are holy and just set me. Every time I fall, it's yours to belong. That's okay, 'cause I hear your voice and he calls me, and I just think I'll never leave now. Greater is the one living inside of me, and he is living in the world. In the
Let's put our hands together. 1, 2, 3, 4.
days I lose the validation, 10,000 hours lost already, wonderful. I'm learning to not really understand this how it's easy, and it makes me looking more and more greater. 'Cause I hear a voice that calls me, and I just think I'll never be now.
Nice job, you guys. All right, we'll start worship in about 15 minutes.